All right, everyone, we're going to get started. Welcome to today's webinar entitled Extending the Quality Initiative to Production Web Applications. I think it's pretty clear to say that the web is here to stay. Everyone, including my 90-year-old grandmother, uses it to perform simple and complex tasks on a daily basis. But like any computer systems, problems do come up occasionally with web applications. Maybe it's a slow loading page, a missing image, a missing button, or even an unavailable page. When these problems happen, operations teams, QA teams, and development teams all have to spend their valuable time triaging whose problem is it. The content we're going to cover today will show you how, through monitoring and production, using the same types of test cases that are commonly used in QA, software teams can spend less time triaging issues and more time improving the quality of their pre-release applications. In essence, they can get back to their day job. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. We'll be recording this webinar, and we'll send you out a copy of the recorded webinar so you can share it with any colleagues who weren't able to make it. Please submit questions during the presentation. We're going to answer all your questions at the end. If you want to submit a question, just use the question and answer box in the GoToWebinar application. Today's presentation is going to be in two parts. In the first part, we're going to cover some background on Alertsite and some of the challenges facing software development teams when it comes to monitoring web apps. This should take about 15 or 20 minutes. In the second part, we're going to walk through a demo of the Alertsite product to see how monitoring can be used to accelerate root cause problem identification and improve quality of service. Today's presenter, Ken Godskind, is the Vice President of Monitoring Products for SmartBear. Ken has over 20 years of experience in web technology and web performance monitoring. Ken is frequently interviewed as an expert in web performance management by national and trade media outlets. Before Alertsite, Ken worked in various roles at Response Networks, Seagate Software, and Informix. At Alertsite, Ken oversees product strategy and performance optimization consulting. At this point, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Ken Godskind from Alertsite.
Thanks for the nice introduction, Bill. My name is Ken Godskind, and I'd like to welcome all the attendees and say good morning and good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for attending. So let's not dawdle too much. Let's go ahead and get started. Alertsite was founded in 1998, and we are proudly serving over 2,400 customers globally today. So we're not a newcomer to the web performance monitoring industry. We did, however, become a part of the SmartBear software family in March of this year, and we're really feeling like this is a great thing for our customers and our employees, and the next step in Alertsite's, industry marketplace success. Alertsite's mission is to help our clients deliver that consistent, high-performance, feel-good online experience to their end users, whether those end users are prospects or customers or partners or suppliers or employees. I mean, just think about all the ways that different users interact with your company through a web browser. In some cases, these interactions are lead generating or revenue generating. In other cases, they're cost savings, or they may just be a mandatory kind of marketplace competitive requirement like online banking. This is a map of our monitoring network. There are approximately 80 different monitoring stations from which we can monitor web application performance today. About half of those are in the US, and about half of those are international. It probably makes sense to define a little bit what end user monitoring is. End user monitoring is all about measuring the quality of the end user experience. End user monitoring provides a set of metrics about response times and reliability and consistency that help align the business operations, QA, and development people by viewing, by seeing the cumulative results of IT investment, by looking at service delivery where the rubber meets the road, the application user interface and the quality of that delivery. Alertsite's monitoring services fall into the category of end-user monitoring called synthetic monitoring. And that means that we're measuring using essentially a robot to walk through the application, exercising critical functionality like banking logins, e-commerce checkouts, customer portals, and the like. And we can take those measurements from any of our geographical monitoring locations shown on this map to help you see what kind of service quality your applications are delivering to the most relevant geographies. And you'll see later we can also take measurements internally as well to fortify the data we're collecting here, so we'll talk about that too. Alertsite's completely built into the browser monitoring technology means that we see the application exactly as it really works. We see it this way because we are using the menus, entering data into the form fields, which execute all the corresponding prefetches, and clicking the buttons on the page. Our monitoring technology operates at that mythical layer 8 of the OSI model, the user layer. So measurement is being driven by a real web browser. Delivering quality is a technical problem and a business problem. You know, why is this more important today than ever? Interactions with all the different user constituencies through a web browser and the business results produced from those are ever increasing for many of our organizations. And all of our companies are working to de-siloize application support activities and operations and pushing user experience to the forefront of application performance management efforts. And software quality efforts are extending themselves beyond user acceptance testing to production. The DevOps movement is an effort to try and pull all these things together organizationally. User expectations for high-quality online experiences, continue to rise, and there's a lot of, historical data that points to how user expectations have been changing over the years. But the internet has really become, kind of a Main Street global, rather than a place where, pioneers like Amazon or eBay or Cisco are blazing new trails. Speed is so important to today's web applications. I have to share this excerpt from a talk that Fred Wilson of Union Square Ventures did last year. It was a talk that he gave about the 10 golden principles of successful web applications. And the number one item on that list, he said, and this is quoting from that talk, was speed. And he goes on to say that speed is more than a feature. Speed is the most important feature. If your application is slow, people won't use it. And then he goes on to say, I see this more with mainstream users than I do with power users. I think that power users sometimes have a bit of sympathetic eye to the challenges of building really fast web apps. So, I'm not 100% sure about his ratings and is speed number one and all of that. Of course, we think speed here is important. But I do know that I find myself, kind of as an old techie, manufacturing reasons why sometimes something I'm using on the web is slow by imagining that someone forgot an index in the Oracle database or something like that. So I do kind of tend to agree that, probably mainstream users have a higher level of expectation because they don't understand all the complexity. They just know they, walk into the virtual store and they want it to work like magic. There's also a ton of analyst research and customer data to support how improving the speed and reliability of web applications can improve business results. The latest data from Track Research points out that application slowdowns are now having twice the business impact on organizations as application downtime, and that these slowdowns are happening 10 times more often than outages. testing today's rich web applications in real-world scenarios can also prove challenging for development, QA, and operations team, given the shift to cloud computing where hardware and software and sometimes lots of parts of the services stack are outside of your control, and all of those physical resources are virtualized, so they're on springs rather than hard resources. And the way many applications today, the way the third-party participants like CDNs or advertising, Facebook even, they're directly rendered at each user's browser rather than sort of remoting the way we did in the old days where we'd go fetch that data out the back end and then push it onto the page. And of course, there's limited access to production class infrastructure during the QA process. So all of these are lending themselves to, extending that visibility to production monitoring. How do Alertsite services help extend the quality initiative to production? Let's look at 3 specific external monitoring services offered by Alertsite. Firstly, we use real web browsers to measure application performance. DesiaClick and the True User technology is the only completely built into the web browser web performance monitoring technology. Not only does this mean that web applications happen exactly the same way they do for your users, but we're also functionally testing the application at each measurement execution as well. True User is a truly exquisite technology. It handles today's rich internet technologies with ease, whether they're AJAX or Flash, and it's incredibly easy to use and provides that instant gratification because most recordings require no complicated fine-tuning or 4GL-like scripting. And those transactions, whether in your account or on your desktop, can be executed instantly from anywhere on our monitoring network or performing operational monitoring in your account. Excuse me. There's lots of advanced features for specialized capabilities like JavaScripting and script variables as well. Secondly, the DesiaClick client also manages our mobile web monitoring. Mobile is becoming very important to many organizations these days, especially as the number of those devices proliferate and web traffic moves to the I compute where I stand rather than I compute at my desk. And Alertsite can monitor as any of today's popular devices like iPhones, iPads, Androids, and we also support adding your own custom handset profiles. These measurements can be taken from our backbone network or from mobile over-the-air locations. And finally, we offer service monitoring. So service monitoring is not the browser, but a way to interact with the basic IP services that support many of the user experiences that we have to support in production. So it offers basic HTTP monitoring, monitoring for SOAP and REST interfaces, monitoring of FTP and DNS services, email services, or just pinging a firewall. Alertsite services offer some other really meaningful capabilities as well. Our Insight monitoring appliance extends the monitoring and testing capabilities of Alertsite service inside your enterprise. This can improve differential analysis by, comparing what you see outside the data center with measurements taken inside the data center. It also extends monitoring to internal applications. I can remember years back, big brand name customers probably on a monthly basis would say, don't worry, we'll poke a hole in the firewall for you, but we never hear that anymore. In fact, we have several customers who have replaced older web performance monitoring technology like Wiley or Mercury with Insight because DesiaClick and True User make them so much easier to use for today's rich web applications. We also offer industry benchmarking. This is a great way to understand how your site is performing relatively to others. Often that's the first question to ask when trying to answer the question, is my site fast enough? Well, how does it compare to your peers? And so the industry benchmarking can help you understand that. I'd like to offer up these 3 best practices for QA and operations. First, you want to identify the appropriate scenarios and hosts for operational monitoring. These are typically, there are typically many more scenarios that are tested during the full quality assurance process than would likely be monitored operationally, and identifying the best candidates may require some input from the business folks and inspection of the visitor tracking data. The goal being to identify the critical money path for high customer usage scenarios that are impactful to your business. Second, convert the selected scripts you use for pre-launch testing and tuning to those production monitoring scripts. And this example actually comes from a group of users in our own customer base. They utilize the Insight appliance internally and use it for monitoring and testing their user acceptance testing environment, as well as some internal applications. And in DejaClick, in the service, converting those user acceptance testing monitoring scripts to production really just requires editing the starting URL in the DejaClick sidebar and re-uploading those transactions. The rest of the interactions are all user events, clicks and form inputs, menu operations, so it's really just a simple one-step conversion. And finally, collecting initial operational baseline performance data before fine-tuning thresholds for alerting or service level agreements is a really good practice. For example, when I'm working with customers about performance alerting and how to configure that, I'll often suggest, collecting a little bit of data, looking at the variability in terms of standard deviation, and helping you set those settings so they're not too noisy, nor not noisy enough that you can get meaningful feedback about performance. So at this point, I'd like to let everybody get a look at Alertsite and do a little bit of demonstration here. If you just give me a few seconds to change my desktop. Okay, so what you're seeing here is a Firefox browser. And let's start by taking a look at the DejaClick client and recording our first transaction. DejaClick is the client browser plugin that customers use to define and configure web performance monitoring scripts. And to get DejaClick running on your own desktop, just point your Firefox browser at www.dejaclick.com, and you'll be able to download it either from add-ons or directly from DejaClick. Oftentimes, DejaClick can be a week or two ahead in terms of versions because there's a little bit of a delay in the process for pushing new versions out to Mozilla. But usually that's not consequential, except when we're releasing really big new features. My objective is to show you 3 things during today's demonstration: transaction recording and how easy they are to create, save, and upload using DejaClick. Mobile monitoring, we'll take a look at a mobile website and a little bit of performance data on over-the-air networks. And then thirdly, diagnosing an operational issue from the monitoring console. So DejaClick is this toolbar that you see here in my browser. And did you all notice I'm running this on the Mac? DejaClick actually runs anywhere Firefox runs, and Mac fans love DejaClick because it doesn't force them to boot into Windows. So onto our transaction recording. The power button turns on and off the DejaClick toolbar. So we're going to power on. I'm going to open the sidebar. The sidebar allows you to adjust some properties where needed and to see how the script is recording and playing back. So we're going ahead and we're going to go ahead and click record. And we're going to change that slightly because that just told me we're set to mobile. We don't want to do that here, so let's click record again. And we'll go ahead and I always say pick on my friends at Amazon, and I don't mean to pick on them, just they have such a huge online budget, and their website is a very nice website for handling dynamic transactions. So we went to the home page. We're going to enter data into the search field. Notice how the prefetch that's happening here will happen during transaction execution, so we're realistically running the transaction. We'll go ahead here and select the first item in the list that comes back. And at this point, I'd like to insert a keyword validation by clicking on the validation panel and hovering over the keyword that I'm looking for. In the event that this item is not available, the transaction will still function. And so I'm going to pick something that's a little more generic than out of this product's description. The list price : label should always be on every valid product page, so we're going to set that up as a validation here. And then we'll toggle off the panel, and we'll do an add to cart. Now here at the add to cart page, the application should always be responding with one item added to the cart. And so we're going to pick that as a keyword to add to the validations for this step. And we're going to go ahead and stop the recording. I think that's enough for this part of the demonstration. Before proceeding with the playback, I just want to expand this and show you that everything that's recorded by the DesiaClick technology is a user event and not a URL get or post request. So this really is a big advantage of DesiaClick. Let's go ahead and play back. And we can see it walking through the user events. You'll note during playback that it actually green boxes the areas of the page that it's interacting with, so it makes it visually easy to follow the user interactions. Now, I did spend a long time, kind of talking and whatnot during the recording, so sometimes during playback, the replay advisor or recording wizard will come up and say, I really think at this point I should be moving ahead. Do you think I should be waiting for stuff, or should I just skip forward? And so this tells it to automatically adjust the script so it'll run correctly. And we're validating the keyword. Something interesting to see here, as you saw some of those green boxes maybe highlight on the screen, is I must have done some hovering on some of the Ajax-oriented stuff, and those events, those hover events, were picked up in the recording. So the really Ajax-y websites are actually a treat to utilize with DesiaClick. Okay, so this page is visually finished for me. What I want to do is tell the wizard here to go ahead and skip to the next event. And voila, we have a good recording. So it's telling us that Replay Advisor made some adjustments, and before we upload to the service, we might want to do a replay. From here, I can do save the transaction if I wanted to save it locally. And if I can type well. So we've saved that locally as an Amazon test. We can make a super bookmark out of that, which gives you one-click access to any of the saved scenarios that you have. That really looked easy, didn't it? And I promise there were no tricks up my sleeve. DesiaClick is just that good. So from here, we saved it. The last thing we might do with a script, and let's give it one final playback to make sure that everything that Replay Advisor did worked correctly. And once we're satisfied that the script is what we want and the validations are functioning, then we can upload it to a user account. Okay, so that got all of our validations, and just waiting for the final part of the script to complete. Okay, good. From here I can log in and upload the recording to my monitoring account. And in this case, I'm just going to replace the existing Amazon 4-step transaction I have in the demo account and say OK. And it leaves us at the configuration screen for that transaction. So the thing that makes DesiaClick's True User technology so special is its intuition. It just knows better than any of the other tools how to work with today's dynamic and rich web applications, especially those where, like the DOM IDs, the XPath stuff are constantly changing because the site is using a content management system, or where there's lots of dynamically bursting AJAX requests. This is really the world that, that functioning at layer 8 gives you. So we've saved it locally, we've uploaded it to the service, and we looked at the configuration screen. Shall we take a look at DesiaClick's mobile monitoring capabilities? So I'm going to change now on the recording button. Instead of being a normal browser, I'm going to choose to be an Apple iPhone. And one of the things you'll see there is that we actually handle the attributes of the mobile devices in a very detailed way. We not only affect the user agent string and the display size, but also whether the device supports Flash and XHTML. And of course, this is how you would modify or add additional handset types. I think for the purposes of this, being an iPhone is great. And why don't we start a new recording? Replay Advisor wants to adjust the screen to give us the mobile display. We're just going to go ahead and do a quick recording of CNN. CNN actually has a different site for the iPhone, the iPad, and for regular web browsers. But of course, it's a highly trafficked news site, so not a surprise. We'll go ahead and quickly record the home page for CNN, and I think we've already seen a multi-step transaction, so we can stop with the home page. But what I'd like to show you here is the test on demand functionality. So test on demand will execute any script that you have on your desktop or in your account from any of Alertsite's monitoring stations, and will let you see it screen by screen on your own desktop like a movie. So to run test on demand, you click the little lightning bolt. And I keep forgetting to follow the rules of verifying that the script will play back first. Now that we've satisfied that need, let's go ahead and execute test on demand. Let's run it from the over-the-air networks. And let's start by running this test from Atlanta's AT&T 3G network. And while we're doing that, we should be able to execute the test from Atlanta's Sprint 4G network as well. Now, my experience with this has me kind of waiting with bated breath for the 4G network because I've seen page load times 4 and 5 times higher. I'm not sure what we're going to see today, but we'll actually look at those results. So I've switched back here to the test from the Atlanta AT&T 3G wireless. When the test on demand runs, you can take the thumbnail and you can enlarge it and get a closer visual inspection of the page that was returned. And you can drill into the performance reporting data, which I think is typically referred to as kind of the waterfall report for how all of the resources of the page are loading in the browser for customers. So here's what we're seeing here, about 13 seconds total load time. Here are the assets that are loading and the final page load stuff. And beneath the detail of each of the assets in the waterfall chart is more specific timing data for each of the stack components. So let's look at that 13 seconds and go look at how it ran on the Sprint 4G network. So I'm sure many of you are starting to deal with the QA process for mobile sites, or some of you already passed that. But you know, after we QA them and put them into production, we need to monitor them and make sure they're serving users well. Let's go ahead and look at the waterfall report here, and we'll note that the 4G network loaded the same CNN homepage in 4.7 seconds. So actually quite a big difference in performance, about 2.5 times on this particular sample. So thanks for your patience while demonstrating that. At this point, I'd like to log into an actual Alertsite account and show you the status dashboard and do some diagnosing of errors. So if you just give me 1 second here. We'll log into an Alertsite account. Go to the login screen. We're going to log in to the demo account. I think we can close the sidebar. Okay. So the status screen is a configurable heads-up display for all operational monitoring in your account. The top section is a consolidated status screen, and the bottom section can display performance charts in a number of different ways. So let's take a look at some of the display options. For example, I guess we'll have to add it. We'll get rid of some of these charts, and we'll look at the Amazon transaction. So now we have the Amazon transaction, and we'll move it up to the top. And we can go into the Amazon transaction. We can change the historical viewing of that, as well as display performance by location. So a lot of nice ways to configure the charts and save them that way so that you can have different ways of looking at your data. Also, another nice feature is the ability to switch to the tiny charts. Instead of 2-column, the small 4-column. And then roll up the status screens and get a different view of all the things you're monitoring. And then the other thing I'd like to show you while I'm here is in the Amazon monitor, you can unroll the summary row and see by monitoring location what your availability looks like and the status of the most current measurement. And so that's a nice feature. And from here, you can drill directly into any of the reporting. So at this point, what I'd like to do is go through the process of receiving a notification and analyzing, sort of what's happening there. There's actually a couple of monitors here that have a few errors. Let's extend our scope from an hour to the last 24 hours. And the Alertsite.com monitor is having some errors and a keyword error because we just changed the website this morning and I forgot to update that monitor. But probably one more useful for diagnostics is this Google search monitor. So let's start by looking at the notifications tab and finding one of the Google search errors. So this is an alert that was sent out regarding the Google search monitor. We'll open up and view the alert that was actually delivered for this. And so this is the alert that was delivered. It told us it was a keyword action on the second step and that the keyword was not found within the returned page. So how can we look further at this? Let's actually come back and, oh, I probably should have grabbed that while I was there. My mistake. If we look in these, when we send these alerts out, we include a link that you can click on, except we nullify links in the user interface. So we're going to take this and we're going to go directly to, so if you got that email, you'd click on the link. You'd log in with your user ID for that account. It would instantly show you the current status, that particular error, and all the references to the alert that were sent out. A notification was issued and the status of this error, where we could drill down into the snapshot report. So the snapshot report, I think, is showing us everything from that location plus and minus 2 hours. We see that Frankfurt is the one getting the errors, and the highlighted row is the error that we drilled down on. One might look at the diagnostic info, and we could see here that it was a status 5, pulling up our secret decoder ring. It was a keyword error within the return page, which we had already looked at. And then hovering over the message context tells us that a keyword validation item wasn't found. We were looking for the keyword www.alertsite.com as the results of a Google search. So let's try to take a look at this another way. Why don't we look at, during this execution, the page that was returned to us? So we can drill on the camera icon and pull up a picture of the page to understand what was happening. So this was a search on Google for the word website monitoring. We were looking for www.alertsite.com, and in this search result, we received no response. So just from an analysis perspective, there's no HTTP error here. It's a keyword error, and the page is not responding with the right response. This could be kind of like a regional support issue for an application that's not working well internationally, or a location-based issue where some block of IP addresses is not being handled correctly by the load balancer. And then in addition to seeing the screenshot for the errors, we also capture all of the request and response headers. And I've actually learned from several customers that the response headers often contain the data about which member of the server farm the load balancer handed the request to. So I understand that's a very valuable feature for diagnosing. Okay, so we looked at the screen captures. We also could have gotten here from the status console. So we could have come directly, navigating back to the status console. We could have clicked on any of these hours for this monitor, and it would take us to the detail report showing all of the samples that were collected during that hour. And the error sample here was Hong Kong. I'm guessing if we drilled into that one, what we'd learn is, again, that was, and of course you get a page for the first and second attempt. Okay, so in Hong Kong, they're not getting plain English back, so that might be why that's not working. But again, this is the page that was responded to when we were looking for alertsite.com. So that kind of concludes my demonstration for today. And if you give me just a second, we'll get started with the Q&A portion of today's webinar while I switch my screen.
All right, Ken, this is Bill. Thank you very much. This has been really helpful to get an understanding of some of the challenges that come with production level monitoring of web applications. What we'd like to do is open it up to your questions now. Please submit questions using the question and answer portion of the GoToWebinar application. We'd also like to actually ask you a question to sort of kick this whole thing off. And we want to know, does your company use automated testing to measure the quality of web apps, monitor web app performance internally, monitor web application performance externally across different geographies? Take a second and provide an answer, and then we'll get started answering your questions. All right, we'll wait a few more seconds for people to complete their voting. I know we're asking people to do two things at once. We'll leave that up on the screen for a second while we get started with our question and answer. The first question, Ken asks, what is match score? It came up when you were highlighting the configuration of a script.
Okay, so that's actually a really good question, and I did talk about it a little bit, but I didn't talk about it using the sidebar terminology. Matching is the logic by which DesiaClick identifies the correct thing that it should be interacting with on the target web page to insert the user events. And the thing that makes, one of the things that makes DesiaClick very special is its intuition. So in this case, intuition refers to two things. One is DesiaClick's ability to identify the right thing to interact with on a page, even when the page is very dynamic or changing. For example, when we were doing the Amazon script, had that particular Canon camera that we selected moved slightly down the list, DesiaClick would have been smart enough using the match score algorithms to find that particular item. If that particular item were not in the list, the match score engines probably would have reverted to positional location and selected the first item in the list. So the point that I'm making here is that DesiaClick does not function on literal XPath. That's one of the attributes that we use to identify what to interact with on the page. We have two other algorithms that help arbitrate, is this the right thing to interact with, and that's part of DesiaClick's intuition. The other part of it is that DesiaClick does a really good job of identifying when a dynamic page is complete, either when the AJAX events stop firing or the DOM stops changing. So the match algorithms have to do with how we identify stuff on the page, but that's a part of the larger, what I categorize as DesiaClick's wonderful intuition.
All right, Ken, thank you. We've got a couple more questions. If you have any questions you want answered, feel free to submit them at this point. The next question asks, how frequently do we need to set up a test to get meaningful results? How often should the test run?
So I think that's a good question, and I would probably respond to that with another question, which is the purpose of this monitoring to collect some performance data for use in long-term trending, or is the purpose of the monitoring operational monitoring? My experience is that business monitoring for operational stuff begins at the largest interval of 15 minutes, but for important production applications, customers will frequently monitor at 5 minutes. And I actually had a customer, about 3 weeks ago, I was talking to about one of their monitors, and they do 1 minute monitoring against their store. So every single minute, location is testing the performance and availability of the web application and using all parts of the web store. And they said to me, they said, you mean every customer isn't monitoring every minute? Do you know how much business we would lose if we were down for 10 minutes? So I think it's in part a preference. I would say in bulk, in general, most customers probably do operational monitoring at the 5-minute interval. Some customers will choose 15, other customers 1 minute. I guess my input there is anything larger than 15 minutes is really generally for performance trending and not for operational monitoring.
Okay, good. That's very helpful. We have a sort of a clarifying question. Someone asked, can Alertsite monitor Flash applications?
Good question. And so there's a number of buzzwords that float around about DesiaClick. One of them is true user, and that's about how we stuff the clicks, enter data into the form fields, use the menus like a real user against, the web application itself. Another is TrueScreen. So TrueScreen is the part of DesiaClick that recognizes when you're interacting with an application that's not HTML within the browser, but an embedded mini application like Flash or Java, and automatically turns on XY coordinate analysis and begins collecting the mouse movements you're doing against the page. So the answer is yes, we support Flash, and we have a particular part of the technology that addresses that called TrueScreen.
Okay, great. We've got one last question, and it asks, what benefits do you get from monitoring across these different geographies? Are there certain types of problems that only appear from different geographies?
So the largest generalized benefit is, for many customers, their constituencies may be concentrated in some particular areas, so having monitoring from those geographies can be very meaningful. The second aspect, though, of having monitoring from multiple geographies is really the ability to answer questions like, is the problem from a single location or is it from all locations? One may represent peering or routing or load balancing issue, where the other represents, I think if you're having an error from all locations, that means there's something wrong much closer to the core of the application. So one of the benefits that you get from using a wider spread geography is that differential analysis between, is this a regional issue or is this something much closer to the core?
All right. Great, Ken, I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for your participation today. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about Alertsite, feel free to visit the brand new site at alertsite.com and also sign up for a free 30-day trial. I'd also ask that you fill out the survey at the end of the webinar today and give us your feedback. I hope everyone has a great day.